Teenager who died in the Birmingham Pub Bombings in 1974 have begun a civil case for damages. Maxine Hambleton was one of 21 people killed in the attacks in the city centre at the Tavern in the Town and the Mulberry Bush pubs.
A writ's been issued to a man now in his 60s who was previously arrested and released in connection with the attacks. A West Midlands Police Chief's Constable is also being sued as the family claim the force has been negligent in its conduct of the bombings inquiry. Well, let's cross to our correspondent Alison Mackenzie. Alison, this is a new stage, isn't it, in what the campaigners are calling their long fight for justice?
Yes, that is how it's being seen by the family of Maxine Hambleton. She was 18 at the time, a shop assistant, caught up in the Tavern in the Town bombing while drinking with friends. She died, one of 21 killed that night. Total devastation for Birmingham. Well, famously, 6 men were tried and convicted and jailed for the bombings, but then released 16 years later on appeal for a crime they hadn't committed. Well, since then, no one has been put before a court, which is of deep frustration for the family. Inquests were held as recently as 2019 that determined that the victims had been unlawfully killed. Well, one of those key campaigners is Julie Hambleton, the sister of Maxine Hambleton, and she feels very let down by the police. So her family's bringing this civil action, a case against the West Midlands Chief Constable today, Sir David Thompson, and a man now in his late 60s called Michael Patrick Reilly. This is what Julie Hambleton told us about why she's taking that action.
The constant reluctance of the police to do what they're paid and employed to do. The civil case is our only avenue now. In fact, it could be our very last avenue that could help us to bring about some truth, some justice and some accountability, which we still don't have nearly 48 years on.
OK, so Alison, tell us more about that man that you just named that's in his 60s.
Yes, this is an individual who's previously been arrested in connection with the bombings and subsequently released unconditionally. Michael Patrick Reilly is his name, always has denied any involvement in the pub bombings. His lawyers said in a statement today that this civil action being brought by the mother of Maxine Hambleton will be strenuously defended. He says that the claims by the mother are rejected, all claims, and he's never been convicted of any wrongdoing in connection to the bombings. Well, ITV cameras caught up with Mr. Reilly back in 2018 in a documentary called Exposure. He told the reporter at the time that the allegations against him in relation to the bombings were simply untrue, without foundation.
No.
You didn't?
No.
Are you sure?
Now go away.
Well, we approached West Midlands Police today because they're also part of this civil action for a statement. They say they have received the writ and add to us, West Midlands Police remains committed to bringing to justice those responsible for the 1974 Birmingham pub bombings atrocities. We know the families feel the pain every bit as much as they did then, and we understand their frustration and their desire for answers regarding the events of that terrible day, which of course did happen 48 years ago.
Alison, thank you very much.
Good evening. The family of one of the youngest victims of the Birmingham pub bombings nearly 50 years ago have launched a civil case for damages. Maxine Hambleton's family say it's their last chance for justice. They've issued proceedings against a Belfast man, Michael Patrick Reilly, who's previously been arrested and questioned about the bombings, as well as the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police. 21 people were killed, nearly 200 injured, when bombs believed to have been planted by the IRA exploded in 2 Birmingham pubs. Giles Latcham reports.
These are some of our fantastic, incredible supporters.
The campaign hasn't gone away. This was a protest last month outside police headquarters. The families and their supporters still determined those who bombed Birmingham must be held accountable.
And bring those responsible, finally,
to justice.
But how to achieve that? 3 years ago, fresh inquests ruled the 21 victims were unlawfully killed, but didn't establish who was responsible. In March last year, families met the Home Secretary, but she said it was inappropriate to hold a public inquiry. Julie Hambleton's 18-year-old sister Maxine died in the bombings, and the civil action's being brought in her name.
It potentially could be our very last opportunity to get some level of justice for our loved ones who were murdered 47 years ago. And if the police aren't going to do the job, then we must find ways of doing it ourselves.
The bombs wreaked carnage in 2 pubs on New Street and at the foot of the rotunda. 6 men were jailed, but their convictions were later quashed. This civil action names a man called Michael Patrick Reilly.
Mr. Reilly, who's in his 60s, was arrested in November 2020 and his home in Belfast searched. But he's never been charged in connection with these bombings, and he's always denied any involvement. His solicitor said today he strongly repudiates all claims in their entirety made by the plaintiff, and these legal proceedings will be strenuously defended.
A writ's also been served on Sir David Thompson, Chief Constable of the West Midlands. He's described the case as the greatest failing in the police force's history.
My understanding of the writ against the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police is to cover not just him but all of his predecessors who have continually let us all down, all the families down, over the decades, and, to add insult to injury, treated us with nothing but contempt.
The force said tonight it understands the family's frustration and desire for answers and remains committed to bringing those responsible to justice. No date has been set for a court hearing. Giles Latcham, BBC Midlands Today, Birmingham.
So, is this civil claim likely to be successful? I put that question to legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg.
To bring a civil claim, you have to work within certain time limits. They're really quite short, normally, quite a short period of months or years after a claim becomes possible, or at the very least after a potential defendant becomes available, after you have evidence. So that's the first challenge, and this case relates to events nearly half a century ago. The second problem is in the legislation which was recently introduced to Parliament. This is legislation called the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill. Now, this has a rather unusual provision in it. It says that unless you brought the claim before the bill was even published, and you wouldn't have known about this before it was published, well, it's too late. And the bill was published in the middle of last month, in the middle of May. Now, we understand that the claim was brought within the time limits, so that may be okay. But you can see the thinking behind this. There is an attempt by Parliament to limit claims of this nature. And if this bill is passed by Parliament, it will apply to other cases. There will be a cut-off. It will be much more difficult to bring claims of this sort.
And the Hambleton family themselves say that they believe this is their last chance for justice. Do you believe they have anywhere else to go after this?
I think this is their last chance, and it's an uphill struggle because they've got to produce evidence. They've got to identify the person they claim responsible for the bombings and say that that person has evidence against him to justify bringing that claim. And if they haven't been able to bring the claim up to now, well, do they have new evidence available? You can sympathise with the position they're in, but it is going to be difficult for them.
There was a successful civil case brought by some of the families in the Omagh bombings. What can we learn from the outcome of that?
What that tells us is that it is sometimes easier to bring a civil claim for compensation because the standard of proof is lower. You only have to prove a civil claim, a claim by one person against another, on the balance of probabilities, whereas for a criminal charge, you have to prove that beyond reasonable doubt. It's a higher standard. So there have been cases where people who don't have enough evidence to lead to a conviction, or the police don't think that they can prosecute, prosecutors don't think that the case satisfies the right test, they can bring civil claims and be awarded compensation. Even if they don't get the money, it gives them some satisfaction. But you still need evidence. Without evidence, you're not even going to win a civil claim.
Joshua Rosenberg, thank you.